First, though, the government certainly hoped for some favourable mentions during these elections for their business-friendly enterprise zones and the Regional Growth Fund. But Bob Hockenhull reports from one area where, so far at least, they're missing out.
Stoke-on-Trent in its boom years, 20,000 miners working in the pits, 10,000 workers employed at Shelton Bar, one of the world's biggest steelworks. In 2011, all of that has gone and the city's still trying to recover. So there was dismay when Stoke-on-Trent, with its high levels of deprivation, didn't get an enterprise zone to encourage growth and jobs.
There was a great deal of disappointment in the North Staffordshire business community that the initial list that was announced in the budget didn't include North Staffordshire, and clearly the government have said that it's an area they consider in need of a great deal of assistance, and therefore an enterprise zone I think is an obvious one.
More enterprise zones will be announced later this year. With local elections around the corner, politicians of all persuasions are now keen to show they recognise Stoke, a city with a 10% unemployment rate, should get help.
Will the Prime Minister understand the need for job creation in Stoke-on-Trent and arrange for his colleagues at local government and at BIS to liaise with us and with the Treasury to make sure that we get that investment when the new list is announced in July?
Yes, I'll certainly ask my right honourable friend the Chancellor to look at whether it can be in the next lot of enterprise zones, because we want to help the pottery communities that she represents.
This is where the Shelton Bar steelworks once stood. Work's being completed to decontaminate the land, an ideal site for an enterprise zone, some believe.
It's next to the A500, which is a dual carriageway which connects to M6 North and M6 South. It's within maybe an hour of Manchester Airport, East Midlands, and slightly longer to Birmingham Airport. It's on the West Coast Main Line. It's got excellent infrastructure and approach, and it's a ready-made site.
Half the site has already been put to use. The Queen opened a National Garden Festival here in 1986. It's now called Festival Park. The Festival Park wasn't an enterprise zone in itself, but it did prove the catalyst for regeneration. New businesses, new leisure facilities. Many feel what's needed now is for this area to become an enterprise zone to secure the level of jobs Stoke-on-Trent needs. Enterprise zones get the benefits of tax relief and relaxed planning laws. Existing businesses might be tempted to move just a few miles to take advantage, but at the nearby expanding Keele Science Park, they're confident there won't be a mass exodus.
I think an enterprise zone for Stoke and North Staffordshire I think is vital. It will help us attract more business because a regenerated Stoke is more attractive for businesses to come here as well. We want to be able to keep as much of the spending power that comes into North Staffordshire within North Staffordshire, and so everything that is designed to make Stoke and North Staffordshire a more attractive place for inward investment I think would benefit Keele.
Stoke-on-Trent found out this week it's had 6 separate bids for regeneration funding turned down by the government. All the more reason to put an enterprise zone in the heart of the city, many business leaders are saying.
Bob Hockenhull reporting, and I can tell you there'll be plenty more lobbying like that from right across our region before that second wave of enterprise zones are announced in the summer. Paul Uppal, whenever you introduce a policy like this, you're bound to create a sense of haves and have-nots in a way. What would you say to people there in Stoke and also in places, Coventry, for example, where they've suffered grievously? You think, well, what have we got to do to get an enterprise zone?
Well, I can understand their concerns. I'm a big fan of enterprise zones, Patrick. I've spoken about these before. I grew up in the shadow of Merry Hill, and I think they send out a message about saying that we are actually trying to encourage enterprise and create a pro-business friendly environment. I think in Wolverhampton, one of the first things I did when I was a new MP was actually speak to developers about encouraging to actually come into the city centre. And one thing I've noticed is that since we've actually made this message about enterprise zones, the whole atmosphere, the mood music in terms of being pro-business and business-friendly is much more positive. So I think there is a win-win situation here.
We know there's going to be one in the Black Country. Do you know where it's going to be, or do you have an idea where it should be, briefly, if you will?
I have my preference. I certainly know where I'd like it to be, but I think there's dialogue coming on at the moment, and certainly I think...
Where would you like it?
I'd love it to be in Wolverhampton.
OK.
More than happy. I think often there's a concern about enterprise zones that they may actually drag other businesses away from other areas.
Exactly, so because the shadow of Merry Hill, as you put it, is quite a deep economic
Absolutely,
shadow.
but I think in Wolverhampton it ticks all the boxes.
Richard Burden, you've said that you'd like the Birmingham and Solihull one to be at Longbridge in your constituency. Beware, Laura Lee Burt watches this programme quite a lot, so why do you venture in here when some would be very afraid?
Well, I think this is one of the problems with enterprise zones, and I have to say good luck to Stoke because they've got huge needs and they do need the investment. The trouble with these enterprise zones, though, is that they don't necessarily bring any investment. There's a bit of tax relief, a bit of rate relief, but the experience of enterprise zones in the 1980s was really not that successful. You know, the jobs that were created were really, really expensive, and actually they tended to focus around property development. And I think if the last few years have taught us anything, is that we can't put all our eggs in one basket. So what we need is more investment in skills, more investment in training and in infrastructure. And on their own, enterprise zones won't do that.
Steve Jordan, you're not going to get one in Cheltenham for the foreseeable future, to put it mildly, but isn't there a case that certain areas will be disadvantaged because of what Richard Burden says, that it will suck investment away from areas outside enterprise zones?
It's fair, so I wouldn't put a huge amount of money on Cheltenham getting one straight away, but I think enterprise zones are a good thing. They've got a lot of good package of measures in there, but equally they're not a panacea, because I think the key to this, the danger is everyone's scrabbling to get one. You could miss the point that the most important thing from my point of view is that business and public sector and local communities need to work together to make things better for their area. That has to be the prerequisite for all of us, whether we've got an enterprise zone or not. And an enterprise zone is a bit of a bonus if you get one. George
Osborne, Richard Burden, has said that we need to rebalance the economy, that here in the West Midlands, private sector employment was falling even before the downturn. So this has got to be a welcome step in that direction, hasn't it?
Well, I'm not sure. You know, I mean, if enterprise zones are going, yes, we want them in this region. I'd like, you know, there's going to be one in Birmingham. I'd like to see it in my area. But, you know, the point is, if you simply draw lines on maps and say encourage investment there, without putting in place things like the infrastructure needed, without having the policies for growth, then it won't work. And the sad thing is at the moment, growth's going down, not up.
Paul Uppal, you're not really creating growth, you're just maybe relocating it briefly.
Well, I have to say, Patrick, of all the people I've spoken to, generally the consensus is that they're very, very much in favour of enterprise zones. I hear what Richard's saying, but you can't just look at it in isolation. It's about looking at the whole broad spectrum of initiatives that we are bringing forward, and I actually think they're a positive thing.
Well, there we press the pause button for the moment. My thanks to you all.